By exploring the web or reading books, you'd surely have come across the history of the origin of the Serenissima. But have you ever wondered why Venice exists and why it was decided to settle here in one of the most inhospitable places in the world, a swamp, with little to live and a shortage of fresh water? Whether it was more or less fictionalized or linked to the myth of the Transfuges of Troy led by Antenore, few wondered why the Venetians, under the pressure of Attila, instead of fleeing to other safer places, decided to take refuge in the lagoon, a few steps from the enemy. Whether you call them Venetici, ancient Veneti, Venetians, Paleo-Veneti, or Eneti, according to Roman historiography, they would have been expelled from Paphlagonia, present-day Turkey, a region of Minor Asia on the Black Sea. For this reason, they joined the Trojan War, where they lost their commander. Left without homeland and without guidance, they turned to Antenore, who, after various events, led them to land on the western shores of the northern Adriatic Sea. It is almost certain that the ancient Venetians settled in this territory because it was very fertile. It was rich in water, it was flat, and had many passages in the mountains that they could use, if they wanted, to reach distant places in order to exchange their products to other peoples. The civilization of the ancient Venetians lasted about 1,000 years, began between the 10th and the 9th century BC and ended in the 2nd century BC, when Romanization took place, that is, when they became similar to the Romans in language, customs, and habits. In this historical period, a center of sorting goods of the Upper Adriatic, known as Altino, was born, a commercial hub of more than significant importance, with the merchant class and canals that had been packed with river boats and carried and sorted the products unloaded from large ships. Following the invasion of the Huns and the subsequent destruction by Attila, the city suffered an initial demographic decline. But it was not until the 7th century BC that it was definitely abandoned by its inhabitants, who, once they moved to Torcello, created the basis for the birth of Venice. The remains of the Roman city, for centuries, were transformed into a sort of quarry of building materials for Venice and the islands of the lagoon, and Altino, the only case in the Veneto, was never inhabited again over the centuries. The Venetians drew up a legend already in the 10th century, according to which their city was founded in a deserted, uninhabited and marshy place in 452, at the time of the invasion of Attila, and when he devastated the Venetian mainland, destroying Altino, Aquileia and other minor centers. The story was intended to ennoble the origin of the city by deriving it from a dramatic event that strongly affected the collective imagination. On this occasion, it is likely that the populations of the looted territories have taken refuge, but only temporarily, in the lagoon area during a rather long period of time. Yet, since it seems that the environment was rich in fresh water and vegetation, it had all the necessary characteristics to attract human settlements. The area in which Venice would have been formed was in fact inhabited in Roman times, although it is not certain whether these were centers of some importance or simply small villages, which supported themselves with fishing, hunting and exploitation of salt ponds, which suggests that it was already known some time before it became a permanent settlement. However, there are those who argue that the invasion of the Huns was not the only reason why the Venetian civilization developed. Recent studies carried out by the Venetian University of Ca' Foscari have shown that between the 4th and the 7th century AC, changes in the river and the lagoon landscape, with a progressive shift towards the sea of the coastline, created new physical conditions for widespread portability. The low stretchers and constant tides offered an ideal environment for commercial and proto-industrial development, firmly connected to the main long-distance communication routes of the time, namely sea routes. The islands over the centuries became locations of warehouses, ports, and places of artisan production. Their implementation required the presence and, therefore, the displacement of large masses of general and skilled workers. Those masses formed the vital nucleus that gave rise to one of the most enduring and prosperous urban and cultural phenomena of the post-classical age, namely the Serenissima. The archaeological data collected in Antenore tells us that the canals and waterways were inexorably covered up from the 3rd to the 4th century AC. The ships could no longer circulate all year round, and gradually it was necessary to move the port where the water was deeper. The lagoon, therefore, became a landscape populated by many workers and few members of an elite of investors and commercial managers, port, agrarian, saline, farmers, etc. Everyone knew how to live on water and thanks to the water. The lagoon, therefore, as a living and always changing environment, offered all the necessary characteristics for safe navigation and an ideal port between the sea and the Po Valley. The conformation of this body of water, moreover, with very low waters furrowed with navigable canals known only by its inhabitants, made it an impregnable fortress. We can therefore say that trade has always been inherent both in the nature of the territory and its inhabitants, who became skilled traders also because the abundance of salt production, which transported along the rivers of the valley such as Adige and Po, reached large cities such as Padua, Verona, Parma, Pavia, Cremona, Piacenza, Ferrara and Mantua. Here it was traded for foods that the Venetians in the lagoon could not produce, especially wheat. With the fall of large centers such as Aquileia, Altino and Ravenna, the Venetians had a free field to be able to trade, improving in maritime traffic and thus being able to exploit these resources not only for survival, but to be able to build one of the most prosperous states in Europe. In fact, the trade expanded to the traffic of precious goods such as metals, fabrics, spices bought in Byzantium, under whose side the Serenissima was born, which were resold throughout the Mediterranean and northern Italy, but also reached a large part of Europe to guarantee the local elites luxury products and raw materials. Venice thus became the crossroads and hinge between East and West. From the year 1000 it began its luckiest period, and its fleet became very powerful. Thus began its expansion on the Mediterranean coast. Not bad for a city born from exiles and built on stilt houses. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and share.